Hi guys, welcome. Tonight, we're going to take a long, slow journey back across the sands of time. I want you to find a comfortable position. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears, release the tension in your jaw, and just breathe. We are traveling back thousands of years to a world that feels alien yet strangely familiar. We are going to explore the origins of one of the oldest living faiths in the world, Zoroastrianism. It is a belief system that today might seem like a whisper from a forgotten age, but its heartbeat still pulses through almost every major religion we know today. Without the visions of a man named Zarathustra, our concepts of heaven and hell, of an ultimate struggle between light and dark, and even the idea of a final judgment might never have existed. This is the story of how one man's quiet reflection in the mountains of ancient Central Asia changed the moral architecture of the human mind forever, long before the great empires of Cyrus or Darius, before the stone carvings of Persepolis stood tall against the sky. There was the plateau of Greater Iran. Imagine a landscape of vast, windswept plains, jagged purple mountains, and skies so clear the stars feel close enough to touch. This was a world of nomadic tribes and early settlers, a people who lived in constant conversation with the elements. To them, the world was alive, but it was also chaotic. They practiced a form of polytheism that felt more like a negotiation with the raw forces of nature. There were spirits in the rushing rivers, gods in the thunder, and a divine presence in the flickering hearth fire that kept the wolves at bay. The religion of these early Indo-Aryan was a complex web of rituals and sacrifices. It was a world of devas, deities who were often volatile and demanded appeasement. These gods didn't necessarily care about human morality. They cared about the smoke of the burnt offering and the correct recitation of ancient chants. It was a cycle of fear and ritual, a constant effort to keep the unpredictable powers of the universe from turning against the tribe. Life was hard, survival was thin, and the gods were as fickle as the mountain storms. Into this world of clashing bronze and ritual smoke, a man named Zarathustra was born. We often call him Zoroaster today, the Greek version of his name, but to his people, he was Zarathustra. He wasn't a king or a conqueror. He was a priest, a manthran, someone trained in the old hymns and the ancient ways. But Zarathustra was a man deeply troubled by what he saw around him. He looked at the endless cattle raids, the cruelty of the local warlords, and the way religion was used to justify violence, and he felt a profound sense of wrongness. He saw a world out of balance. There is a story, whispered through the millennia, that Zarathustra spent years in wandering silence. He withdrew from the noise of the tribes and the smoke of the altars. He sought the quiet places, the high caves where the air is thin and the silence is heavy. He was searching for something that the old gods couldn't provide, a reason for the suffering, and a way for a human being to be truly good. He was a man asking the first why. One morning, the story goes, as the sun began to spill its first golden light over the edge of the world, Zarathustra went down to a river to fetch water for a dawn ritual. As he stepped into the cold, clear current, he had a vision. He saw a being of pure light, a Vohu Manath, personification of the good mind. This being led him into the presence of a singular, supreme consciousness. Not a storm god, not a war god, but a god of wisdom. This was Ahura Mazda. Ahura Mazda was not like the devas of old. He wasn't a deity you bribed with meat or wine. He was the wise Lord, the source of all Asha, the cosmic order, truth, and righteousness. In that moment of crystalline clarity, Zarathustra realized that the universe wasn't just a collection of random forces. It was a purposeful creation, built on a foundation of truth. But he also saw something else, something darker. He perceived a shadow, a spirit of droge, or deceit. This was Angraminyu, the destructive spirit. Now, it is important to understand that Zarathustra didn't see this as a battle between two equal gods in a fantasy tale. He saw it as a fundamental moral choice. He realized that existence itself was a canvas upon which two opposing forces were acting. Ahura Mazda represented everything that was life-affirming, creative, and truthful. Angraminyu was everything that was stagnant, destructive, and false. It was the first time in human history that the universe was framed as a moral struggle. Zarathustra's message was revolutionary, and because it was revolutionary, it was dangerous. He returned to his people and told them that the old gods they feared, the gods of war and chaos, were not gods at all, but delusions or malevolent spirits. He told them that there was only one wise Lord, and that this Lord did not want their sacrifices. He wanted their good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. Imagine the silence that must have fallen over the campfire when he spoke these words, to a people whose entire lives were built on the ritual of sacrifice. The idea that God cared more about their internal character than their outward offerings was a shock to the system. Zarathustra was telling them that they were not just pawns of the gods. He was telling them they were participants. He was giving them agency. He taught that every human being, from the lowliest shepherd to the most powerful chieftain, was a soldier in a cosmic war. But the weapons weren't spears or swords. The weapons were the choices made every single day. When you told the truth instead of a lie, you strengthened the realm of Ahura Mazda. When you cared for a stray animal or tended to a thirsty plant, you were pushing back the darkness of Angraminyu. This was a religion of the mind and the heart. For a long time, Zarathustra was a voice crying in the wilderness. He was mocked, he was cast out, and he was forced to flee his homeland. You can almost feel the cold of those nights, the loneliness of a man who held a truth that no one wanted to hear. He wandered for years, his only companion the conviction that the world was meant for more than just cycles of violence. Eventually, he found his way to the court of a king named Vishnu. Legend says that through his wisdom and perhaps a few miracles, he convinced the king of the truth of his vision. From that royal spark, the fire of Zoroastrianism began to spread. It wasn't a fire of destruction, but a fire of illumination. To this day, fire remains the most sacred symbol of the faith. Not because the fire itself is a god, but because it is the purest representation of Ahura Mazda's light and warmth on earth. It is a focal point for the mind, a reminder of the inner light that every human carries as the centuries rolled on. This simple, powerful idea began to weave itself into the very fabric of Persian culture. It became the soul of the Achaemenid Empire. When you think of the great kings like Cyrus, who famously allowed the exiled Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, you are seeing the practical application of Zarathustra's teachings. Cyrus wasn't just being a clever politician. He was acting on the belief that a righteous ruler must uphold the dignity of all people as part of his service to the truth. The atmosphere of a Zoroastrian world was one of profound respect for the natural world, because the earth, the water, and the fire were creations of the wise Lord. They were to be kept pure. It was one of the first faiths to emphasize environmental stewardship. To pollute a river or mistreat a beast of burden was not just a mistake. It was a sin against the creation itself. There was a quiet, rhythmic beauty to this life, life lived in harmony with the Asha, the divine timing of the universe. As you lie there, imagine the sound of the wind moving through the tall grass of the Persian steppes. Imagine the smell of sandalwood and frankincense burning in a small stone hearth. This was a world where every sunrise was a victory of light over dark. People would wake and recite the Hashem Vohu, a short prayer celebrating righteousness for its own sake. Righteousness is the best good, they would whisper. It is happiness. Happiness is for him who is righteous, for the sake of the best righteousness. It is a very peaceful thought, isn't it? The idea that your life has a direct impact on the balance of the entire universe. That even in your smallest acts of kindness, you are a co-creator with the divine. But Zarathustra's vision went even deeper. He didn't just talk about how to live. He talked about where we are going. He introduced the idea that history is not a circle, endlessly repeating itself, but a straight line moving toward a conclusion. He taught that one day there would be a great Frosh Hokareti, a making wonderful, a time when the world would be healed, when the shadows of deceit would be burned away, and when every soul would be held accountable for the path it chose to walk. He spoke of a bridge, the Chinvet Bridge, which every soul must cross after death. It was said that the bridge would be wide and easy for those who lived with good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. But for those who chose the path of the Druge, the bridge would turn on its side, becoming as narrow as a razor's edge, and they would fall into the darkness. This was the birth of the individual conscience. Before Zarathustra, morality was often tribal. You were good if you were loyal to your kin. Zarathustra made it personal. He made it about the soul's internal alignment. Think about how much that has shaped us. Think about the quiet weight we feel when we have to make a choice between what is easy and what is right. That weight, that inner compass, was first described with such clarity by a man in the Mount. For 10 long years, Zarathustra lived in the spaces between the worlds of men. We often think of prophets as being born with a certainty that radiates from their skin. But for Zarathustra, the journey was paved with the heavy stones of doubt. He was a man in his 20s and 30s, a time when most men are building homes, raising children, and securing their place in the tribe. Instead, he chose the path of the outcast. He moved through the jagged peaks of the mountains, his sandals wearing thin against the flint and limestone. He was searching for a truth that wouldn't shatter when the first storm arrived. Imagine the loneliness of those mountain nights. There were no books to read, no scholars to debate. There was only the vast, indifferent expanse of the stars and the internal dialogue of a mind that refused to accept the cruelty of the world as just the way things are. He would watch the wolves circle the herds in the valleys below, and he would wonder why life seemed to require such endless suffering. He would watch the local chieftains raid neighboring villages, stealing cattle and burning crops in the names of gods who supposedly delighted in the smell of blood. He felt a profound, aching dissonance. If the gods were great, why was their world so broken? If the gods were good, why did they reward the most violent among men? In his isolation, Zarathustra became a student of the silence. He learned the language of the wind as it whistled through the high caves. He watched the way a single sprout of green could crack through the hardest rock, driven by an invisible, insistent force of life. He began to see that there was an order to the universe, a quiet, underlying rhythm that didn't depend on the whims of the warrior god. The sun rose every morning without fail. The stars moved in their fixed patterns. The seasons breathed in and out, bringing snow and then blossom. He called this order Asha. Asha is a word that is hard to translate, but in the stillness of the mountain, Zarathustra began to feel its meaning. It is truth. It is order. It is the way things are meant to be when they are at their most pure. It is the health of a body, the clarity of a spring, the honesty of a word. And opposed to it, he saw the druge, the lie. The druge was the rot in the wood, the poison in the well, the deception in the heart of a man who says one thing but does another. He realized that the chaos he saw in the world of men wasn't a divine decree. It was a betrayal of Asha. It was the choice to follow the lie. But even with these realizations, he felt the weight of his own insignificance. He was one man, aging, solitary, and unheard. He had moments where he surely looked at his reflection in a mountain pool and saw only a fool, who had wasted his youth chasing ghosts in the wind. This is the human side of the prophet, the shivering man who wonders if he is simply losing his mind in the thin air. He wrestled with the silence, demanding an answer, a sign, a reason to keep his heart open. Then came the year of the turning. Zarathustra was 40 years old. He had traveled to the banks of the Deity River, a place of rushing, cold water that fed the thirsty plains. It was the time of the spring festival, a moment of rebirth. He stepped into the water to perform a ritual of purification, feeling the numbing cold against his skin, the current tugging at his legs. As he emerged from the river, dripping and shivering, the world didn't just look different, it transformed. He didn't see a ghost or a monster. He saw a radiance that made the morning sun seem like a dim candle. In the traditional stories, this was Vohumana, the personification of the good mind. But for Zarathustra, in that intimate, life-changing moment, it was as if the scales fell from his eyes. He felt a presence that was infinitely vast yet intimately close. He was no longer looking at the world. He was looking through it, into the very mind of the Creator. He was led into a space that transcended the physical, a realm of pure light where he stood before Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord. This wasn't a meeting of a slave and a master. It was a meeting of a seeker and the truth. In this communion, the doubts that had plagued him for a decade vanished like mist. He understood that Ahura Mazda was not a god who demanded fear, but a god who invited partnership. He saw that the wise Lord was the source of all that is good, all that is light, and all that is life-sustaining. The vision was not a set of commandments carved in stone. It was an awakening of the soul. He realized that the struggle between Asha and truth and the lie wasn't just something happening in the stars or in the halls of kings. It was happening inside him. It was happening inside every living being. Ahura Mazda revealed that the universe was a grand project of making wonderful, and that every human being was given the greatest gift imaginable, the power of choice. Imagine the sensation of that realization. It is both the most liberating and the most terrifying thought a person can have. You are not a pawn. You are not a leaf blown by the wind of the gods. You are a co-author of reality. Every time you choose a good thought, you are weaving a thread of light into the fabric of existence. Every time you speak a good word, you are strengthening the foundations of the world. Every good deed is a blow struck against the darkness of the lie. Zarathustra stayed by the river for a long time, the water flowing past him, carrying away the remnants of his old life. He felt the immense weight of moral responsibility settle onto his shoulders, but it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose. He looked at the trees, the animals, and the distant smoke of human hearths with a new, fierce love. They were all part of the same sacred architecture. To protect a cow was to serve the wise Lord. To tell the truth to a neighbor was to uphold the pillars of the cosmos. He understood now that the evil he saw in the world, the raids, the lies, the cruelty wasn't a natural part of the world. It was a parasite. It was the result of beings, both human and spiritual, choosing to turn away from the light. And because it was a choice, it could be undone. The world could be healed. The Froscia Coretti, the final restoration, wasn't just a distant hope. It was a goal that required his help. The silence of the mountains was gone now, replaced by a song in his heart. But as he turned back toward the world of men, a new kind of coldness settled in. He knew what lay ahead. He was going back to the tribes, back to the priests who made their living from the blood of sacrifices, back to the warlords who built their power on the lie. He was going back to tell them that their gods were hollow and their ways were dark. As he walked down from the heights, his shadow stretched long across the dust. He was no longer the wandering seeker. He was a man with a message that would set the world on fire. But the world does not always want to be illuminated. People often prefer the familiar shadows to the blinding truth. Zarathustra could feel the resistance waiting for him in the valleys. He could sense the anger of the powerful who would see his message of equality and choice as a threat to their very existence. He walked toward the first village he saw, his heart steady, his mind clear. He knew that he might be rejected. He knew that the people he loved might turn their backs on him. He knew that the path of the Ashavan, the follower of truth, is rarely an easy one. The air grew thicker as he descended, the smells of domestic life, charcoal, wet wool, cooking meat filling his senses. He was back among his kin, but he was a stranger now, carrying a secret that was too big for any one man to hold. He stood at the edge of the settlement, watching the children play in the dirt and the men sharpen their bronze spears. He took a deep breath, the taste of the earth and the coming rain on his tongue. He knew that from this moment on, his life was no longer his own. It belonged to the light. It belonged to the wise Lord. And it belonged to the long, slow struggle to bring the world back into the arms of Asha. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the world into a deep, bruised purple. The first stars began to blink into existence, the same stars he had watched for 10 years in the wilderness. But they didn't look like distant, cold points of light anymore. They looked like the watchfires of an army of spirits, waiting for him to begin. He took his first step into the village, and the silence of the mountain followed him. A quiet strength that would soon be tested by the voices of 1,000 men who were not yet ready to hear the truth. As you settle deeper into your rest, think of that transition. The transition from the clarity of the vision to the messy, difficult reality of human life. Think of the courage it takes to hold on to a light when everyone around you is content to live in the dark. The story of Zarathustra is not just a story of a prophet. It is a story of the human conscience waking up for the very first time. But the tribes were waiting, and the old gods were not so easily forgotten. The priests were already preparing their arguments, and the kings were already reaching for their swords. The fire was lit, but the wind was rising, and the darkness was far from defeated. Imagine you are sitting by a small hearth fire in a stone-built home thousands of years ago. Outside, the night is vast and absolute. There are no city lights to dim the brilliance of the Milky Way, which spills across the sky like a river of silver milk. In this world, the darkness feels heavy, almost physical. It is in this darkness that the ancient mind began to perceive the two great currents of existence. Zarathustra didn't see the world as a chaotic accident. He saw it as a purposeful creation that had been interrupted by a shadow. He spoke of two primordial spirits, like twins who met at the beginning of time. One was Ahura Mazda, the spirit of life, wisdom, and light. The other was Angraminyu, the spirit of destruction, ignorance, and darkness. But try to think of these not as two gods in a distant heaven, but as to fundamental principles that reside in every atom, every gust of wind, and every human thought. Ahura Mazda is the great yes of the universe. He is the impulse that makes a seed push through the dirt to find the sun. He is the clarity of a mountain stream, the warmth of a mother's hand, and the unwavering truth of the sunrise. He is Asha, the divine order that keeps the planets in their orbits and the heart beating in its rhythm. To look upon the world through the eyes of Ahura Mazda is to see a world that is inherently good, beautiful, and meant to flourish. Then there is the shadow. Angraminyu is not a creator. He cannot make anything new. He can only break what is already made. He is the no that seeks to undo the yes. He is the rot in the harvest, the poison in the well, and the sudden, irrational anger that ruins a friendship. He is the drudge, the lie. When a person tells a lie, they are not just uttering words. They are inviting a piece of that cosmic darkness into the world, creating a small pocket of chaos where there should be order. Zarathustra saw that these two forces were locked in a struggle that defined the very nature of time itself. As you lie there, imagine the world as a grand, intricate tapestry being woven on a loom that spans the horizon. Every thread is a life, every color is an action. Ahura Mazda is the master weaver, laying down the pattern of beauty and truth. But Angraminyu is the one who tries to fray the edges, to knot the threads, and to dull the colors. This struggle isn't happening in some far-off realm. It's happening right here, in the way we treat the earth, the way we treat each other, and the way we treat ourselves. In the old religions that Zarathustra sought to change, humans were often seen as small, insignificant creatures who had to beg the gods for mercy. But Zarathustra's vision changed everything. He taught that we are not spectators in this war. We are the soldiers. But the weapons we carry are not made of bronze or iron. Our weapons are our choices. This is the revolutionary concept of free will. Zarathustra believed that Ahura Mazda granted every human being the sovereignty of their own mind. We are the only part of creation that can consciously choose which side to support. The sun must follow its path, and the lion must follow its hunger. But a human being can choose to be truthful even when it is difficult. A human can choose to be kind when the world is cruel. Think about the weight of that for a moment. It means that the universe is not finished yet. It is still being decided, moment by moment, by the decisions of ordinary people. When you wake up and choose to speak a word of encouragement to someone who is struggling, you are literally tipping the balance of the cosmic scales toward the light. When you tend to a garden and help life grow, you are an ally of the wise Lord. This makes every single day a sacred opportunity. It turns the mundane acts of life, cooking a meal, cleaning a room, helping a neighbor, into acts of spiritual warfare against the darkness. It is a philosophy of immense dignity. It says that no matter how small you feel, your actions resonate through the rafters of the universe. In the center of this world sat the fire. To the followers of Zarathustra, fire was the most sacred thing on earth. If you've ever sat and stared into a flame, you know how hypnotic it can be. You've seen how it dances, how it seems to have a life of its own, and how it provides both light and warmth. For the ancient Persians, fire was the physical manifestation of Ashar, the truth. It was the purest element. It consumes impurities and leaves only ash behind, but the light itself remains untainted. When they built their fire temples, they weren't worshipping the fire itself, but rather using it as a mirror for the divine. Imagine walking into one of those ancient stone structures. The air is cool and smells of burning sandalwood and frankincense. In the center, on a raised stone altar, a flame has been kept burning for years, maybe decades. It is never allowed to go out. The priests who tend it wear white veils over their mouths, so that even their breath, symbol of human mortality and imperfection, does not pollute the purity of the flame. As you stand there in the silence, watching the orange and blue light flicker against the walls, you realize that this flame is a reminder of the inner fire that Zarathustra said lives in every soul. Our conscience is our internal fire. It is the part of us that knows the difference between the truth and the lie. Zarathustra's world was one of radical responsibility. He didn't promise that life would be easy if you followed the light. In fact, he warned that the followers of the lie would always be tempted by power and greed. He saw the world around him being torn apart by deva worshippers, warlords, and priests who used religion to justify theft and violence. He saw how the lie could be dressed up in fine clothes and spoken with a silver tongue. But he remained steadfast in the belief that the lie is ultimately sterile. It can destroy, but it can never build anything that lasts. Think about the silence of the night again. In that silence, we often feel our regrets or our anxieties. In the Zoroastrian tradition, those feelings are the druj, trying to cloud the good mind. The good mind, vohumana, is the faculty that allows us to see through the illusions of the shadow. It is the clarity we feel when we finally do the right thing after a long struggle. Zarathustra taught that we must constantly cultivate this good mind through reflection and prayer. Not prayer as a list of demands, but prayer as a way of aligning our heartbeat with the heartbeat of the wise Lord. Every animal was also seen as part of this struggle. The cow, the dog, the rooster, these were creatures of the light. The rooster was especially loved because its crowing announced the end of the night and the return of the sun. The ultimate victory of Ahura Mazda. To mistreat an animal was to do the work of Angramanyu. To care for them was a form of worship. Even the water in the rivers was considered a sacred trust. You wouldn't throw waste into a stream because that water was a physical expression of the divine order. Everything was connected. Everything was holy as the years of his life passed. Zarathustra's message began to settle into the bones of the Persian people. It created a culture that valued honesty above almost all else. The historian Herodotus once wrote that the Persians taught their children only 3 things: to ride a horse, to use a bow, and to tell the truth. This wasn't just a social rule. It was a cosmic necessity. To tell a lie was to surrender your soul to the destructive spirit. It was to become a dregvant, a follower of the lie, and to move oneself away from the warmth of the cosmic hearth. Imagine the peace that comes with such a clear worldview. You don't have to wonder what the meaning of life is. The meaning is right there in front of you, to be an Ashtavan, a bringer of truth. It is to look at the chaos of the world and say, I will not add to this. I will build. I will heal. I will speak clearly. It is a slow, steady path. It is the path of the gardener who knows that the forest doesn't grow overnight, but through the patient, daily work of planting and watering. But the darkness is patient, too. Zarathustra knew that the struggle would last for thousands of years. He spoke of a time when the world would seem to be completely overtaken by the shadow, a time of winter and iron when the lie would seem to have won. But he also spoke of a Sociant, a savior who would come to lead the final charge of the light. He believed that eventually the shadow would be exhausted. Angraminyu, having nothing left to destroy, would eventually consume himself, and the world would be made wonderful once again. The Frosh Hokareti would begin a time where there would be no more hunger, no more death, and no more lies, as you drift closer to the shores of sleep. Think about how this ancient vision still lives in us. We still feel that inner pull toward the good. We still feel the sting of a lie and the warmth of the truth. We are the heirs to Zarathustra's fire. We are the ones who carry the flame through the long night of history. The air in your room is still. The house is quiet. But in the invisible realm that Zarathustra described, there is a constant movement. There is the slow, rhythmic weaving of the tapestry. There is the steady breath of the wise lord, and the fading hiss of the shadow. You are a part of that rhythm. Your rest tonight is a preparation for the choices you will make tomorrow. It is a time to gather your light so that when the sun rises, the great fire of the sky, you will be ready to meet it. But even as we find peace in the idea of the struggle, there is a final, sobering thought that Zarathustra left for his followers. Find that perfect spot where your body feels light. Imagine the cool, dry air of the Persian night brushing against your skin. The sky above you is a deep, velvet indigo, and the stars are so bright they seem to vibrate with a silent music. In this world, death was not seen as a sudden end, but as a transitioner, slow unfolding of the truth that a person had been building, brick by brick, thought by thought, throughout their entire life, according to the ancient teachings. When a person draws their last breath, the soul does not immediately vanish into the unknown. Instead, it lingers. For 3 days and 3 nights, the soul sits at the head of its physical body. Imagine the quiet of those 3 nights. The soul is reflecting. It is looking back at the life it just finished, replaying the moments of kindness and the moments of shadow. During these 72 hours, the living relatives would keep a fire burning nearby, and priests would chant the sacred gathas, the hymns of Zarathustra. The smoke of the incense and the rhythm of the prayers were like a soft tether, helping the soul stay calm as it prepared for the great crossing. On the dawn of the 4th day, as the first rays of the sun touch the horizon, the soul begins to move. It feels a wind blowing from the direction of the spirit world. For those who lived a life aligned with Asha, with truth and order, this wind is the most exquisite thing they have ever experienced. It is a sweet-scented breeze, carrying the fragrance of 1,000 spring blossoms, jasmine and sandalwood. It feels like a gentle caress on the face. But for those who chose the path of the Druge, the lie, the wind is cold, biting, and carries a foul, stagnant stench. Even before the journey truly begins, the soul starts to encounter the reflection of its own character. As the soul follows this wind, it eventually arrives at the foot of the Chinvat Bridge. This is the bridge that spans the abyss between this world and the realms beyond. It is guarded by 2 4-eyed dogs who can see into the very depths of a spirit. But the most incredible part of this journey is not the bridge itself, but who meets you there. Out of the mist of the morning, a figure appears. This is your Dina in the modern world. We might call the Dina your conscience, but in the Zoroastrian vision, she is a living personification of everything you did, thought, and said while you were alive. As you stand at the edge of the bridge, you see a maiden approaching. If you have lived a life of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. The Dina appears as a young woman of breathtaking beauty, more radiant than any queen, wearing robes woven of pure light. The soul, amazed by her beauty, asks, "Who are you, that I have never seen anyone so lovely in the world of the living?" And she replies with a voice like silver bells, "I am no stranger. I am your own soul. I am your good thoughts, your good words, and your good deeds. It was you who made me beautiful. But for the soul that chose the path of cruelty and deceit, the encounter is very different. The figure that emerges from the mist is a withered, terrifying hag, hunched and wretched, smelling of decay. When the soul asks in horror who she is, she reveals the same truth. I am your own deeds. I am the lies you told, the pain you caused, and the light you extinguished. It was you who made me this way. This is the core of Zarathustra's vision. Judgment is not something handed down by a vengeful god sitting on a throne. It is an encounter with yourself. It is the moment where you can no longer hide from the person you became. Then comes the crossing. The Chinvet Bridge is a living thing. For the righteous soul, led by its beautiful Dina, the bridge magically expands. It becomes a wide, golden highway, steady and secure underfoot. It feels like walking across a sun-drenched meadow. Step by step, the soul ascends through 3 levels of light. The first step is the level of good thoughts, associated with the stars. The second step is good words, associated with the moon. The third step is good deeds, associated with the sun. With each step, the soul feels lighter, more joyful, until it finally reaches the Garodamana, the house of song. The house of song is not a place of clouds and harps. It is a realm of eternal radiance and music, where the wise Lord Ahura Mazda dwells. It is a place of total clarity, where every question is answered and every sorrow is healed. It is the homecoming of the light to the light. There is no fear here, only the profound peace of a soul that has finished its work and returned to the source of all Asha. But what of the bridge for the one who followed the lie? As that soul attempts to cross, the bridge begins to twist and turn. It narrows until it is as thin and sharp as a razor's edge. The soul loses its footing, trembling with the weight of its own regrets, and falls. It doesn't fall into a pit of fire and pitchforks, but into the Drujo Damana, the house of lies. The house of lies is described with a psychological haunting that is far more terrifying than physical pain. It is a place of darkness so thick you can grab it with your hand. It is a place of absolute loneliness. Even though there are many souls there, each one feels completely alone, trapped in a cold, silent void. The only food is foul-smelling, and the only company is the memory of the lies they told. It is a state of existence where the soul is forced to live in the chaos it created on earth. It is not a punishment in the sense of a sentence. It is the natural consequence of moving away from the light. If you spend your life building a house of shadows, that is where you will eventually reside. Yet, even in this dark vision, Zarathustra offered a spark of hope that set his faith apart from many others. He believed that even the house of lies was not necessarily forever. He taught that at the end of time, there would be a great purification. A river of molten metal would flow over the earth, and all souls, the living and the dead, would pass through it. To the righteous, it would feel like walking through warm milk. To the others, the metal would burn away the druge, the impurities of the soul. In this final, cosmic healing, every single consciousness would eventually be purified and reunited with the wise Lord. Even the shadow would be reclaimed. It was a vision of a universe where, In the end, nothing good is ever lost, and everything broken is made whole. As you breathe slowly now, imagine yourself standing at the foot of that bridge, not with fear, but with a sense of quiet wonder. Imagine the air smelling of those spring blossoms. Think about the small things you did today, the kind word you said to a stranger, the patience you showed when you were tired, the moment you chose the truth even when it was inconvenient. In the world of Zarathustra, those weren't just passing moments. They were the very things that make your bridge wide and steady. They were the beauty you were giving to your Dina. The ancient Persians lived with this map of the afterlife in their minds. It made their lives here on earth feel heavy with purpose. When a Persian king like Cyrus the Great looked out over his vast empire, he wasn't just thinking about taxes or borders. He was thinking about the Asha he was responsible for maintaining. He was thinking about the bridge he would one day have to cross. It created a civilization that, at its best, was obsessed with the idea of the good mind and the protection of the innocent. The ripples of these ideas began to spread out from the heart of Iran like waves on a still lake. As the centuries passed, the Persian Empire came into contact with the people of Israel, with the Greeks, and eventually with the burgeoning world of the Romans. The concepts of a final judgment, of a personified spirit of evil, of a bridge between worlds, and of a paradise of light began to find their way into the hearts of other cultures. The very word paradise comes from the old Persian paradisa, meaning a walled gardener, place of peace and protection from the wilderness outside. When we think of the afterlife today, many of our images, the scales of justice, the gates of heaven, the abyss of the shadows confined, their ancestors in the hymns of a man who looked at the stars over the Persian plains 3 millennia ago. Zarathustra gave us a story that helped us make sense of the greatest mystery of all. He told us that our lives matter, that our choices echo, and that death is not a wall, but a bridge. As the night wraps its quiet arms around you, let the image of that golden, widening bridge stay in your mind. Feel the warmth of the sun-drenched steps under your feet. Listen for the faint, distant music of the House of Song. You are part of a long, ancient line of souls who have sought the light. You are an Ashavan, a carrier of the truth, simply by existing with a heart that seeks the good. The fire in the hearth of history never truly goes out. It just changes shape. The wisdom of the ancient Persians is a flame that still flickers in the way we dream about our future and the way we hope for a world where the shadows finally give way to the dawn. But as these Persian ideas traveled along the dusty trade routes, they were about to encounter new cultures and new thinkers. They were about to be translated into new languages and woven into the foundations of religions that would eventually dominate the globe. The story of Zarathustra was no longer just a Persian story. It was becoming a human story, a seed planted in the soil of the world, waiting for the right moment to bloom in ways that would change the course of history forever. In many traditions, the afterlife is a place of physical rewards or physical punishments. But for the ancient Persians, the journey of the soul was something much more intimate and, perhaps, much more profound. It was a journey into the ultimate clarity of one's own conscience. So, as you settle into your blankets, I want you to imagine that you are a traveler standing on the edge of a great, starlit horizon. The air is perfectly still, the weight of your body has vanished, and all that remains is the essence of who you are, your thoughts, your memories, and the choices you made when no one was watching. Zarathustra taught that the universe is built on a foundation of Asha, that divine order and truth we have spoken of before. But he also knew that while we live in this world of bone and breath, the truth is often clouded. We justify our small cruelties. We hide our lies behind clever words. We mistake the shadow for the light. But in the moment after the Chinvat Bridge is crossed, the fog lifts. There are no more excuses. There is only the soul, standing in the presence of its own reality. Imagine. First, the path of the soul that has spent its life tending to the fire of truth. As this soul moves past the bridge, it doesn't find a cold courtroom. It finds an atmosphere of increasing warmth and resonance. The first step it takes is onto the level of the stars. This is the realm of humata. Good thoughts. Here, the soul is flooded with the memory of every moment it chose, clarity over confusion. Think of the quiet peace you feel when you finally understand a difficult truth, or the stillness that comes after a long meditation. In this first heaven, that feeling is magnified 1,000 times. The soul realizes that every positive thought it ever had was a seed that has now blossomed into a luminous star. With the next step, the soul rises to the level of the moon. This is hooked up good words. Imagine a place where the air itself is made of harmony. In the world of the living, words can be sharp, they can wound or they can heal. But here, the soul is surrounded by the echo of every kind word it ever spoke. Every time you comforted a friend, every time you spoke up for someone who was being treated unfairly, every time you told the truth when it would have been easier to lie, those words are now a soft, silver light that bathes the soul in a sense of profound belonging. It is the feeling of being perfectly understood, of having your voice join a celestial choir that has been singing since the beginning of time. Then comes the third step, the level of the sun. This is faster good deeds. This is the realm of action, of the tangible good we leave behind. The light here is golden and life-giving. The soul feels the warmth of every selfless act it performed. It is the feeling of a job well done, of a garden in full bloom, of a child's laughter. The soul recognizes that it was never just a bystander in the universe. It was a builder. It contributed to the making wonderful of the world. And in this sunlight, the soul finally sees the full pattern of its life, not as a series of random events, but as a deliberate work of art dedicated to the wise Lord. And then, finally, the soul enters the Garo Dhamana, the house of song. I want you to try to imagine a place where the primary substance of reality is music. Not the kind of music we hear with our ears, but a vibration that resonates in the very core of our being. The house of song is the home of Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord. It is described as a place of infinite radiance, but it isn't a blinding light. It is the light of 1,000 dawns, soft and welcoming. In this place, there is no such thing as fatigue. There is no hunger, no thirst, and no sorrow. But more importantly, there is no drudge, no lie in the house of song. Communication is instantaneous and perfect. You are surrounded by the spirits of the righteous, the Ashavan, and you share in their collective joy. It is a state of being where you are finally, completely yourself, stripped of all the anxieties and defenses we carry in the physical world. It is the ultimate rest. If you have ever had a moment in your life where you felt perfectly safe, perfectly loved, and perfectly at peace, perhaps sitting by a fire with people you trust, or watching the sun set over a calm ocean that is just a tiny, distant whisper of what the house of song feels like. It is the eternal yes of the universe, welcoming you home. But Zarathustra was a realist. He knew that not every soul chooses the light, and so he described a very different destination for those who turned their backs on Asher. This is the Druhodimana, the house of lies. I want you to put away any images you might have of fire and brimstone. In the Zoroastrian vision, the house of lies is not hot. It is freezing cold, and it is not loud. It is terrifyingly silent. It is a place of absolute psychological isolation. When a soul that has lived a life of deceit and cruelty falls from the Chinvat bridge, it doesn't land in a torture chamber. It lands in a reflection of its own internal state. Throughout its life, this soul chose to separate itself from others through lies. It chose to destroy rather than build. It chose the ego over the truth. And so, in the house of lies, that separation becomes absolute. Imagine standing in a room that has no walls and no ceiling, yet feels incredibly cramped. The darkness is so thick it feels like a heavy wool blanket pressed against your eyes. You know there are other souls there, but you cannot see them, and you cannot hear them. Even if you screamed, the sound would seem to be swallowed by the shadows before it even left your throat. This is the ultimate consequence of the lie, the loss of connection. The punishment in the house of lies is simply the realization of what one has lost. The soul sits in the dark and is forced to consume its own choices. The ancient texts say the food there is foul-smelling and putrid, but this is a metaphor for the bitterness of regret. The soul remembers the moments it could have been kind but chose to be cruel. It remembers the words that broke hearts and the deeds that spread darkness. In the house of lies, time doesn't seem to move. A day feels like a century. It is a state of profound, bone-deep loneliness. But even here, in this dark vision, there is a sense of moral clarity that is almost gentle. The house of lies isn't meant to satisfy the anger of a god. Ahura Mazda doesn't hate the souls in the darkness. He mourns them. The darkness exists because the souls chose to move away from the only source of light. It is a self-imposed exile. And because it is self-imposed, the Zoroastrian tradition holds a secret hope that it is not the final word. Zarathustra taught that the struggle between light and shadow would eventually come to an end. He spoke of the Froshkareti, the renovation of the universe. He believed that at the end of time, a great fire of molten metal would sweep across the world. To the souls in the house of song, this would feel like a bath of warm milk, a final purification before the world is made new. But for the souls in the house of lies, the metal would be a transformative fire. It would burn away the drudge, the layers of lies and cruelty that had encrusted the soul. Imagine a piece of gold that has been covered in grime and soot for centuries. The fire doesn't destroy the gold. It destroys the dirt. This was the Zoroastrian view of the final judgment. It was a universal restoration. Even the most shadowed soul would eventually be scrubbed clean of its darkness and allowed to join the rest of humanity in the perfected world. It is one of the most optimistic visions of the end of time ever, recorded a belief that evil is a temporary sickness, and that health and light are the only things that are truly eternal. As you lie there, feeling the steady rise and fall of your breath, think about the peace that this worldview brought to the ancient Persians. They didn't live in a state of constant, trembling fear of a capricious deity. They lived with a sense of immense personal power. They knew that their heaven was something they were building right now, with every thought, every word, and every action. They knew that their hell was not a pit waiting for them, but a state of mind they were either inviting in or pushing away. This clarity of purpose is what allowed the Persian Empire to be, in many ways, more tolerant than those that came before it. If you believe that every person is a soldier in a cosmic battle for the truth, You don't need to force them to pray the way you do. You just need to encourage them to follow the good mind. You look at a stranger and you don't see an enemy. You see a potential ally of the light. The silence of your room is like the silence of that Persian plateau under the stars. It is a silence full of potential. It is the space where your own Dina, your own conscience resides. For hundreds of years, these ideas stayed within the borders of the Persian world. But history is a river, and rivers always find a way to overflow their banks. To the west of the Persian heartland, there was a small, resilient people who had been taken from their homes and brought as captives to the city of Babylon. These were the people of Judah. They lived in a world of many gods, a world where they struggled to understand why their own God had allowed their temple to be destroyed and their people to be exiled. Then, in the year 539 BCE, the gates of Babylon were opened. Cyrus the Great, the follower of Ahura Mazda, entered the city not as a destroyer, but as a liberator. He did something that was unheard of in the ancient world. He told the exiles they were free to go home. He even gave them the resources to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. As you lie there, I want you to imagine the moment just before a candle is snuffed out. There is a fraction of a second where the light is gone, but the smoke still lingers, and the darkness rushes in to fill the void. That sensation, that sudden absence of order, that chilling entry of the unknowns, the essence of what Zarathustra was trying to describe. He didn't see evil as a rival god with equal power to the Creator. He saw it as a parasite. He saw it as the spirit of destruction that exists only to unmake what is good. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the coolness of the air entering your lungs, and as you exhale, imagine letting go of the need to categorize everything into simple stories. In the ancient Persian mind, Angramanyu was the personification of Druj, the lie. But the lie wasn't just a false statement. It was a cosmic state of being. It was the rot that makes the woods soft and useless. It was the drought that cracks the earth and withers the grain. It was the sudden, unprovoked anger that shatters a peace that took years to build. Zarathustra taught that, in the beginning, there were two twins, two mentalities or two directions. One chose life, and the other chose the unmaking of life. Angramanyu is the name we give to that choice of unmaking. He is the spirit of entropy. Imagine a beautifully woven rug, every thread perfectly placed to tell a story of flowers and rivers. Ahura Mazda is the weaver. Angramanyu is the one who quietly pulls at a loose thread, hoping to see the whole pattern unravel back into a pile of tangled, meaningless yarn. This wasn't a fantasy for the people of the Iranian plateau. It was their daily reality. When a cattle raid happened in the middle of the night, when a trusted friend betrayed a secret, or when a plague swept through the valley, they didn't see it as fate. They saw it as the successful work of the destructive spirit. They felt the weight of a world that was being actively attacked by a force of pure negation. I want you to imagine sitting in a small room during a winter storm. The walls are thick, the fire is bright, and you feel safe. But you know that just outside that door, there is a cold that wants to get in. The cold doesn't want anything in a human sense. It simply is the absence of heat. It is a force that will extinguish your life if you let the fire go out. This is how Angramanyu was perceived. He is the cold. He is the darkness that waits for the light to fail. He doesn't create his own world. He just tries to turn this world into a wasteland. As the centuries passed and Zarathustra's ideas began to settle into the collective soul of humanity, the image of Angramanyu began to change. In the early days, he was a mindset, a spiritual pollution. But as humans are prone to do, they began to give the shadow a face. He became Ahriman in the later Persian dialects, more personified adversary. And here is where the story takes a fascinating turn. One that connects those ancient Persian fires to the very beliefs that many people hold today. Think about the concept of the adversary before Zarathustra. Most cultures didn't really have a bad guy in their religion. The gods of the Greeks or the Egyptians could be cruel, yes, but they were just acting out their own natures. There wasn't a singular force of evil working against the divine plan. But when the ideas of Persia began to drift westward, they carried with them this radical notion that there is an active, conscious spirit of opposition in the universe. When the Jewish people lived within the Persian Empire, they encountered this idea of the Druj, the spirit of the lie. They were a people who had long wrestled with why a good God would allow suffering. In the Persian philosophy, they found a potential answer. They found the Satan, a word that originally meant the accuser or the adversary. Over time, the subtle, psychological shadow of Angra Mainyu began to merge with these local traditions. The spirit of destruction began to grow horns, to sprout wings of leather, and to inhabit a realm of fire. But if we go back to Zarathustra's original vision, the Satan archetype is much more frightening because it is much more real. He is the voice in your head that tells you a lie is just this once. He is the impulse to be cruel because you are hurt. He is the apathy that makes you look away when someone is in need. He is the mindset of destruction. As you lie there in the stillness, think about the silence of the desert. In that silence, every sound matters. A single pebble falling can sound like a thunderclap. In the same way, Zarathustra believed that in the cosmic silence, every small choice matters. He taught that Angra Mainyu has no power over you unless you invite him in. He is like a shadow that can only exist if you turn your back to the light. The moment you turn around, the moment you choose good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, the shadow has nowhere to hide. It simply ceases to be. This is a very empowering thought, isn't it? That the prototype of all evil is ultimately a hollow thing. It is a parasite that dies when the host chooses the truth. But oh, how hard it is to always choose the truth. The ancient Persians knew this better than anyone. They saw the lie as a constant, looming threat to their civilization. They knew that if a king became a follower of the lie, the whole empire would suffer. If the judges took bribes, the ashar, the order of society, would crumble. This fear of the Druj shaped the very foundation of the great Persian empires that were to come. Imagine the rise of the Achaemenid dynasty, the kings like Cyrus and Darius. These weren't just politicians. They were defenders of the truth. When Darius the Great carved his achievements into the side of a mountain at Behistun, he didn't just talk about his battles. He spoke about the lie. He wrote, "The lie made them rebellious, so that these men deceived the people." For a Persian king, the greatest enemy wasn't a foreign army. It was the spirit of deception that could rot his people from within. Imagine the atmosphere of an ancient Persian court. It is a place of immense beauty gardens filled with roses and flowing water. Stone walls carved with images of peaceful processions. But beneath that beauty, there is a fierce commitment to the light. To tell a lie in the presence of the king was a capital offense, not just because it was rude, but because it was a religious betrayal. It was an invitation to Angra Mainyu to enter the palace. The darkness we are talking about tonight isn't a scary story told to children. It is a meditation on the fragility of goodness. It takes years to build a forest, but only a single match to burn it down. It takes a lifetime to build a reputation for honesty, but only one lie to destroy it. Angramanyu is that match. He is that single lie. He is the shortcut, the easy way out, the selfish choice as the night deepens. Let yourself feel the profound weight of this responsibility. You are the keeper of the fire. In the Zoroastrian tradition, the hearth fire was never supposed to go out. It was a physical symbol of the human commitment to keep the darkness at bay. When you sleep tonight, your mind is doing a similar kind of work. It is processing the day, clearing away the rot of stress and confusion, and preparing the light of your consciousness for the dawn. Zarathustra's vision of Angramanyu eventually traveled so far that we almost forgot where it came from. It seeped into the stories of the Middle East, into the philosophies of Greece, and into the very heart of the Western world. We began to talk about the battle between good and evil as if it were a natural law, like gravity. But it wasn't always that way. It started with a man in the mountains of Persia who realized that the world doesn't just happen to us. We create it with our intentions. The shadow is patient. It doesn't need to win a great battle. It only needs to wait for us to get tired. It waits for us to stop caring. It waits for us to believe that our choices don't matter. But as you listen to my voice, and as you feel the steady rhythm of your breath, you know that isn't true. The very fact that you seek out these stories, that you look for meaning in the past, is a sign that your light is burning bright. The ancient Persians believed that at the very end of time, Angramanyu would be completely defeated, not by a sword, but by the fact that eventually everyone would choose the truth. The lie would have no one left to listen to it. The destructive spirit would become like a flame with no fuel, flickering smaller and smaller until it finally vanished into the light of the perfected world. Think of that, a world where the shadow is not conquered, but simply outshined. But that time is not yet. We are still in the middle of the story. We are still the ones standing at the hearth, making sure the fire doesn't fail. The great empires of the Persians, the Parthians, the Sassanids would rise and fall, each one trying to build a fortress for the Asher in a world that often preferred the Druge. They would build cities of marble and gold. They would create the first postal systems, and they would draft the first declarations of human rights, all because they believed that the wise Lord demanded order and justice in the face of chaos. The wind outside your window is just the wind. The shadows in the corner are just shadows. But the ideas we've explored tonight are the true guardians of the night. They remind us that even in the deepest darkness, there is a choice. They remind us that the shadow has no power of its own. It is only the space where the light hasn't reached yet. I want you to find your most comfortable position now. Let your breathing slow down, becoming as steady and rhythmic as the soft pulse of a distant drum. Imagine you are standing on a high balcony in Pasargadae, the first capital of the Persian Empire. The air is cool and carries the scent of rosewater and damp earth. Below you, the world is green, a lush, meticulously designed garden that the Persians called a pep. This is where our word paradise comes from. In this garden, every tree has been planted with intention. Every stream flows with purpose, and the chaos of the desert has been transformed into a place of peace. This was the vision Cyrus had for his empire, a garden where many different flowers could grow together, each one protected by the same sun. Cyrus was born into a world of constant warfare, a world where the strong devoured the weak and where conquered people were routinely led away in chains. their gods insulted, and their temples burned. But Cyrus carried within him the seeds of the Gottas, the hymns of Zarathustra. He believed that he was an Ashavan, a seeker of truth. To Cyrus, being a king wasn't about being a master of slaves. It was about being a guardian of Asha, the cosmic order. He believed that if the universe was a place of divine balance, then his kingdom should be a reflection of that balance. He saw himself as a servant of the wise Lord, tasked with pushing back the darkness of cruelty and chaos. Imagine the young Cyrus as he began to unite the tribes of the Persians and the Medes. He didn't come as a destroyer. When he defeated a rival king, he didn't execute him or humiliate his people. Instead, he showed mercy. He invited his former enemies to join him, to become part of something larger. This was the first spark of a new kind of governance, moral governance. Cyrus understood something that many rulers after him would forget, that an empire built on fear is a house built on sand. But an empire built on respect is a fortress that can withstand the storms of time. As his influence grew, Cyrus moved toward the great city of Babylon. At that time, Babylon was the center of the world, a city of towering blue-glazed gates and hanging gardens. But it was also a city in pain. Its king, Nabonidus, had neglected the local gods and oppressed the people. The air in Babylon was thick with the scent of stagnant water and the quiet desperation of the exiled. When the Persian army arrived at the gates of Babylon in 539 BCE, the world braced for a bloodbath. They expected the walls to be breached and the streets to run red, but that is not what happened. I want you to imagine the silence of that night in Babylon. The great King Cyrus did not order a siege. Instead, his engineers worked quietly in the darkness, diverting the waters of the Euphrates River so that his soldiers could simply wade into the city under the massive river gates. They entered not as conquerors, but as guests. There was no slaughter. There was no looting. In fact, the ancient records tell us that the people of Babylon welcomed Cyrus with open arms, strewing green branches in his path as he entered the city. He walked through the gates not as a god-king demanding worship, but as a liberator. Once inside Babylon, Cyrus did something even more remarkable. He didn't tear down the temples of the Babylonian gods. Instead, he went to the temple of Marduk and showed his respect. He understood that while he followed the wise Lord, Ahura Mazda, the light of truth could be found in many different lamps. This was the birth of religious tolerance on a global scale. Cyrus issued a decree, carved into a clay cylinder that we still possess today, the Cyrus cylinder. In it, he declared that all people under his rule were free to return to their homes and to worship their own gods in their own way. He abolished forced labor and returned the sacred icons that had been stolen by previous kings. Think about the profound peace of that moment. For thousands of people who had been living in exile, who had forgotten the smell of their own hills and the sound of their own songs, Cyrus was the answer to a prayer they had almost stopped whispering. He was the anointed one, a king who used his power to set the captive free. As the Persian Empire expanded, from the shores of the Mediterranean to the Indus River, it became a mosaic of cultures. Cyrus ensured that the government spoke the languages of the people it ruled. He built the Royal Road, a highway that stretched for thousands of miles, allowing messages to travel with incredible speed. But at the heart of every city, at the center of every province, was the quiet, glowing presence of the fire. Imagine a small stone tower standing on a hillside in the Persian heartland. This is a fire temple. Unlike the massive, ornate temples of Egypt or Babylon. These structures were simple, designed to hold a single, eternal flame. I want you to imagine the smell of the frankincense burning in that hearth. The priests, the magi, would stand before the flame in white robes, their faces covered with veils so that their breath would not touch the purity of the fire. To them, the fire was not a god, but a window. It was the physical presence of the usher that Cyrus sought to uphold. When Cyrus looked at the fire, he saw the light of truth that must be kept alive through good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. This wasn't just a religious ritual, it was a philosophy of leadership. To rule a kingdom meant to keep the fire of justice burning. It meant ensuring that the widow was protected, that the orphan was fed, and that the merchant was not cheated. The fire in the temple was a reminder that the king himself was accountable to a higher law. The world under Cyrus was a world that felt, for the first time, like it was moving toward a destination. It wasn't just a cycle of kings rising and falling. It was a project. The Persians were building a world where the good mind could flourish. They built incredible irrigation systems called qanats, bringing water from deep underground to turn the desert into a garden. They created a system of coins and weights to make trade fair for everyone. This was the practical application of Zoroastrianism, to make the earth wonderful, through human effort and divine wisdom. As you drift closer to the edge of sleep, imagine the quiet dignity of Cyrus's life. He didn't build a towering pyramid for his tomb. He built a simple, elegant stone chamber on a high plinth in Pasargadae. It still stands there today, a solitary monument in a vast, empty plain. Legend says that when Alexander the Great arrived there centuries later, he found an inscription on the tomb that said, "O man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, for I know you will come. I am Cyrus who won the Persians their empire. Do not, therefore, begrudge me this bit of earth that covers my bones." Alexander, the great conqueror, was said to have been moved to tears by the humility of the man who had ruled the world. Cyrus didn't need a grand monument because his true monument was the peace he had brought to millions. He had shown that a king could be a father to his people, that strength could be found in mercy, and that the highest form of power is the power to set others free. The legacy of Cyrus's tolerance created a ripple effect that would change the spiritual landscape of the world. Because he allowed people to keep their identities, he saved cultures that were on the brink of vanishing. He fostered an environment where ideas could be exchanged freely. In the marketplaces of the Persian Empire, the wisdom of India met the philosophy of Greece, and the mysticism of Egypt met the ethics of the Levant. It was a golden age of the mind. But there was one group of people for whom Cyrus's decree was more than just a political act. It was a miracle. Imagine a group of people sitting by the rivers of Babylon, their harps hung on the willow trees, weeping for the home they thought they would never see again. These were the exiles from Judah. They had spent 70 years in the shadow of the Babylonian ziggurats, wondering if their god had abandoned them. Then came the Persians. Then came Cyrus. I want you to imagine the day the decree was read in the squares of Babylon. The King of Kings had not only told the Jews they could go back to Jerusalem, but he had ordered that the gold and silver vessels taken from their temple be returned to them. He even provided funds from his own treasury to help them rebuild their city walls. To the Jewish people, Cyrus was not just a foreign king. He was a shepherd sent by the divine. As the caravans began their long journey back to the hills of Judea, they carried more than just their belongings. They carried the memory of a Persian world where the struggle between light and darkness was the central theme of existence. They carried the memory of the anointed king who practiced good deeds on a global scale. As they settled back into their ancestral lands and began to rewrite their sacred scrolls, the whispers of the Magi began to weave themselves into the fabric of their own stories. The air in your room is still now. The journey of Cyrus is coming to a close, and the great empire he built is settling into the quiet of the night. But the bridge he built between the east and the west is just beginning to hum with life. The ideas of heaven and hell, of a coming savior, and of a final judgment are no longer just Persian secrets. They are traveling in the hearts of the returning exiles, moving toward a small city in the hills called Jerusalem. We are traveling to the banks of the Euphrates, to the legendary city of Babylon, and eventually on the long, dusty road back to Jerusalem. We've spoken of the wise Lord and the destructive spirit, and we've seen how Cyrus the Great opened the gates of history with a key of tolerance. But tonight, we're going to look at the invisible cargo that traveled with those returning exiles, the ideas that would eventually shape the very bedrock of the world's most famous stories. We are going to explore how the meeting of two ancient peoples changed our vision of the end of time, the nature of the soul, and the celestial beings that watch over us from the shadows of the stars. Asterisk, the massive walls, covered in blue glazed tiles depicting lions and dragons, are beginning to cool after a long day in the Mesopotamian sun. The river Euphrates flows like liquid silver, carrying the reflections of the ziggurats and the palm trees that line its banks. For 70 years, this city was a gilded cage for the people of Judah. They were a people in mourning, sitting by the rivers, their harps silent, their hearts turned toward a ruined temple hundreds of miles away. In this state of exile, they were vulnerable, their old certainties shaken. They were looking for answers to the deepest questions. Why did we suffer? Is our God the only one? What happens to us when the light of life finally goes out? Asterisk, in the early days of their history, before the exile, the concept of the afterlife was a grey, quiet thing. They spoke of Sheol not, a place of fire or a place of song, but a place of stillness, a shadowy underworld where all souls went, regardless of their deeds. There was no heaven to win and no hell to fear. There was only the silence of the dust. But then the Persians arrived. When the armies of Cyrus entered Babylon, they didn't just bring soldiers. They brought a worldview that was as bright as a mountain sunrise. They brought the teachings of Zarathustra, a vision of a universe caught in a magnificent moral struggle where every human choice echoed into eternity. Imagine the quiet conversations that must have taken place in the marketplaces and the libraries of Babylon. Picture a Jewish scholar, perhaps a priest or a scribe, sitting in the soft glow of an oil lamp, listening to a Persian magi speak of the wise Lord and the destructive spirit. Imagine the wonder as the magi describes the Yazatas, the beings worthy of worship, the celestial guardians who act as the hands and eyes of the light. In the Persian mind, the universe was teeming with life that we cannot see. There were guardians for the sun, for the waters, for the truth itself. These weren't just distant spirits. They were active participants in the cosmic battle as you lie there. Let your mind drift to the concept of the angel before this encounter. The messengers of the divine in the ancient Levant were often mysterious, fleeting figures. But under the influence of the Persian Amasia, Spentis, the bounteous immortals, the vision of the celestial hierarchy began to bloom. The angels began to take on names, personalities, and specific roles. They became the guardians of the nations, the recorders of deeds, and the warriors of the light. We began to see the rise of figures like Michael and Gabriel's celestial generals who stand in the presence of the divine, mirroring the radiant beings that Zarathustra saw in his mountain visions. The heavens were no longer empty. They were a vast, organized court of light, dedicated to the triumph of the good mind. But where there is light, there must also be a shadow. In the early texts, the Satan was often just an officer, heavenly prosecutor, an accuser who tested the faith of men. But as the Persian concept of Angra Mainyu, the spirit of the lie, began to seep into the consciousness of the region, the shadow took on a darker, more personal form. The adversary was no longer just a tester of faith. He became the architect of chaos, the personification of the Druge that seeks to unmake the world. The struggle was no longer just a local one between tribes. It became a cosmic war. Every human heart became a battlefield where the Prince of Light and the Prince of Darkness vied for territory. Can you feel the shift in the weight of the world? Suddenly, every act of kindness was a blow struck for the angels, and every lie was a victory for the demons. This sense of urgency began to transform the way people thought about the future. If there is a great war, there must be a final battle. If there is a struggle, there must be a victor. This led to the birth of what we now call apocalypticism, the belief that history is moving toward a grand, explosive conclusion. The Persians spoke of the Froshokereti, the making wonderful, a time when the world would be purified and the shadows would be cast out forever. The Jewish exiles, returning to their homeland under the protection of the Persian kings, brought this hope with them. They began to speak of a day of the Lord, a final judgment where the scales would be balanced and the righteous would be vindicated. Think about the silence of a graveyard. In the old world, that was the end. The dust returned to the dust. But the Persians brought a message of radical hope. The resurrection of the dead. Zarathustra taught that the body was not a prison to be escaped, but a sacred creation that would one day be remade. He spoke of a time when the bones would be gathered, when the breath of life would return, and when the physical world itself would be perfected. Imagine the comfort this must have brought to a people who had seen their city burned and their families scattered. The promise that nothing, not even death, could permanently destroy. The work of the wise Lord. As you breathe in the stillness of your room, let the idea of resurrection be a metaphor for the way ideas themselves never truly die. They sleep, they transform, and they rise again in new forms. The House of Song and the House of Lies were not just Persian myths. They were the blueprints for the heaven and hell that would eventually occupy the minds of billions. The Chinvet Bridge, where the soul meets its conscience, became the blueprint for the final judgment, where every life is weighed on the scales of eternal justice. The road from Babylon to Jerusalem was long months of walking through the sun-scorched deserts and the rocky highlands. But the returning exiles weren't just carrying gold and silver for their temple. They were carrying a new vocabulary of the soul. They were carrying the idea that a single human life, as small as it might seem, is a crucial part of a divine plan to heal the universe. They were carrying the belief that the light will always, eventually, overcome the dark dot as the years turned. Into centuries, these Persian whispers were woven into the scrolls and the sermons of the Levant. They became the atmosphere in which the great teachers of the West were born. When we hear stories of legions of angels, of a tempter in the wilderness, of a world that will pass away to make room for a new heaven and a new earth, we are hearing the echoes of the Magi. We are hearing the legacy of Zarathustra, filtered through the experience of the exile and the joy of the return. The fire in the temple in Jerusalem was lit once again, but its flame now reflected a different light. It was a flame that looked toward the end of time, toward a savior who would come to lead the final charge against the shadows. The world was no longer a place of random gods and fickle spirits. It was a purposeful journey toward the making wonderful. The night is deep now. The Euphrates is far behind us, and the hills of Judea are silent under the moon. The ancient world is a place of deep shadows and brilliant fires, but it is also a place of profound interconnectedness. No story belongs to just one people. We are all weavers of the same tapestry, using the threads that were handed to us by those who walked the road before Dot. As you drift closer to sleep, think of the angels, not as figures on a greeting card, but as the Persians saw them, as rays of the sun, as guardians of the truth, as the quiet strength that sits beside you in the dark. Think of the resurrection not as a distant miracle, but as the daily renewal of your own spirit, the way your mind clears after a long rest, ready to face the world with good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. The bridge is waiting, the stars are singing, and the light is always returning. The story of how these ideas eventually found their way into the heart of the Roman Empire and beyond is a tale of travelers, merchants, and mystics. It is a story of how a small flame in the mountains of Persia became a lighthouse for the entire world. But for tonight, the fire is small and warm. The scrolls are rolled up and put away. The road is quiet. You have traveled far through the history of the soul, and it is time to rest in the house of song that you have built with your own quiet reflections. The dawn will come, the Asha will be upheld, and the world will be made wonderful once more, one breath at a time. Find that place of perfect comfort. Let your hands rest loosely by your sides, and feel the weight of your body being fully supported by the earth beneath you. Tonight, the boundaries between cultures and centuries are going to blur, like the colors of a sunset melting into the deep indigo of night. We are looking at the architecture of the afterlife, the spiritual blueprint that we often take for granted, unaware that its stones were quarried thousands of years ago in a land far, far away for most of human history, before the rise of the great empires. The idea of what happened after we died was a misty, indistinct thing. In many cultures, death was simply a fading away into a grey underworld, a place of shadows where kings and peasants alike wandered in a dreamless silence. There was no great reward for the virtuous, and no burning punishment for the wicked. But as the teachings of Zarathustra began to travel along the silk roads and the spice routes, a new and startling clarity began to emerge. The universe was no longer a place of random chaos. It was a classroom, a workshop, and ultimately, a courtroom. Imagine you are sitting in a quiet courtyard in the city of Alexandria, or perhaps in the bustling markets of Antioch, a few centuries before the Common Era. You are surrounded by a sea of different language, Greek, Aramaic, Persian, Hebrew. In this melting pot of ideas, a quiet evolution is taking place. People are beginning to speak of a cosmic struggle that feels deeply personal. They are moving away from the idea of fickle, tribal gods and toward a singular, universal moral standard, Zarathustra's vision of the House of Song Vigaro. Damana began to transform into the concept of heaven as we know it today. It wasn't just a place where the gods lived. It was a destination that had to be earned. It was a realm of pure light and harmony, the ultimate reward for a life lived in alignment with the truth. And as this idea traveled west, it met with the local traditions of the Levant and the philosophical inquiries of the Greeks. The House of Song became the kingdom of God, a celestial city where the weary could finally find rest. the imagery of radiant light, of musical harmony, and of a divine presence that wipes away every tear. These were the threads of Persian silk woven into the tapestry of the Western soul. But if there is a place of ultimate light, the human mind demands a place of ultimate shadow. The house of lies, the cold, silent, and isolated void where the soul encounters its own deceit, began to shift as well. Under the influence of different climates and different cultural anxieties, the house of lies began to take on more vivid, more frightening textures. In the hot deserts of the Middle East, the cold silence of the Persian hell was often replaced by imagery of fire and sulphur, a physical representation of the spiritual burning of a guilty conscience. But the core idea remained Zoroastrian, that hell is not a place of arbitrary torture, but the logical conclusion of a life spent serving the Gij, the lie. It is the state of being completely separated from the light, as you breathe in the stillness. Think about the figure of the adversary. We have spoken of Angraminu, the destructive spirit, who was not a god but a mindset, the primordial no to Ahura Mazda's yes for centuries. This idea of a personified cosmic evil was unique to the Persians, but as the world became more interconnected, the shadow grew. The Satan of the earlier traditions, who was once just a heavenly prosecutor or a tester of men, began to absorb the traits of the destructive spirit. He became the prince of darkness, the architect of lies, the one who whispers in the ear and leads the soul astray. The prototype of the fallen angel, the rebel who seeks to unmake the creation, is a direct descendant of that ancient Persian shadow. Can you feel the shift in the weight of the night? It is as if the air itself is charged with the significance of our choices. This is the Zoroastrian legacy, the belief that the universe is a moral arena, the idea of the final judgment. The Froscia Coretti, or the making wonderful, is perhaps the most enduring part of this quiet evolution. The Persians believed that history was a straight line, not a circle. It was a journey toward a specific end. They believed that at the end of time, a savior so shined would come to lead the final victory of the light. This savior wasn't a warrior king of flesh and blood, but a spiritual force of renewal. As this idea met with the Jewish hope for a Messiah, the two visions began to merge and influence one another. The expectation of a coming figure who would heal the world, raise the dead, and establish a kingdom of eternal peace is a hope that was nurtured by the fires of the Magi long before it reached the hills of Galilee. Think about the concept of the resurrection. In the ancient world, many believed that the physical body was a lowly thing, a shell to be discarded. But the Persians loved the physical world. They saw it as the good creation of the wise Lord. Therefore, the ultimate victory had to be a physical victory. The dead would not just live on as ghosts. They would be remade. Their bodies would be restored to a state of perfection, free from age, disease, and death. This radical optimism, the belief that the earth itself will be saved and glorified, is one of the most beautiful gifts the Persian mind gave to the world. It turned the afterlife from a distant, ethereal dream into a tangible, earthly promise as the centuries rolled on. The Persian Empire eventually fell to the armies of Alexander, and later to the conquests of the Arab caliphates. The physical temples were often destroyed, and the number of practicing Zoroastrians dwindled. But the ideas did not vanish. They were like seeds that have been carried by the wind to far-off fields. They took root in the theology of Judaism. They blossomed in the heart of Christianity, and they were woven into the intricate geometry of Islam. We live in a world that is haunted by these ancient Persian secrets, When we speak of a guardian angel watching over a child, we are echoing the Fravashi, the ancestral spirits that the Persians believed protected every human being. When we talk about the end of the world and the battle between good and evil, we are speaking the language of Zarathustra. When we feel that internal pull toward the truth, even when it is difficult, we are standing on the foundations of a conscience that was first defined in the mountains of Iran 3,000 years ago. Imagine the quiet, steady flow of time. It is like a great river that has been fed by many different streams. We often look at the river and see only the water in front of us, forgetting the distant springs where it all began. We live in the house of song and the house of lies every day, in the choices we make and the thoughts we harbor, unaware that these rooms were designed by a prophet who looked at the fire and saw the mind of God. As you drift closer to the shores of sleep, let yourself wonder about the invisible threads that connect you to the past. We are all heirs to a legacy we barely understand. We carry the fears and the hopes of people whose names have been forgotten, yet whose visions shape our very dreams. The fire of Zarathustra was never truly extinguished. It just became the light by which we see our own destinies. The air in your room is cool and still. The night is a vast open space, much like the desert plateaus where the Magi once watched the stars. In that silence, there is a profound sense of continuity. You are not a solitary island in time. You are a part of a long, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying evolution of the human spirit. As the light of your consciousness dims, and you prepare to cross the bridge into the world of dreams, ask yourself, what parts of my own soul were built by hands I will never meet? What ancient truths am I carrying in my heart, passed down through 100 generations like a flame from a distant hearth? The stars are silent, the fire is a glowing ember, and the journey continues, even in the stillness of your rest. Adjust your pillow, pull your blanket up to your chin, and let your eyes grow heavy. Imagine the air around you is perfectly still, scented faintly with the smell of sandalwood. We are moving through the centuries at the speed of a heartbeat. Today, the followers of Zarathustra are fewer in number, perhaps only a few 100,000 spread across the globe, but their impact on the spirit of humanity remains as vast as the sky. They are the guardians of the light, the living links to a philosophy that first told us we are responsible for the fate of the universe. As you listen, feel the continuity of that responsibility. Feel how the choices made thousands of years ago still breathe through the way we understand right and wrong today. The story of the modern Zoroastrian is a story of incredible resilience. After the fall of the last great Persian empires, the followers of the wise Lord faced centuries of pressure and change. Many stayed in their ancestral homeland of Iran, tending to their fires in the desert cities of Yazd and Kerman, but others looked toward the sea. Over 1,000 years ago, a group of believers set sail from the Persian coast, seeking a land where they could keep their faith without fear. They landed on the shores of Gujarat in western India. These people became the Parsis, and their arrival is a story of grace and promise that still defines their identity today. Legend says that when the Parsi priests arrived at the court of the local king, Jadi Rana, the king showed them a vessel of milk filled to the very brim. It was his way of saying that his land was full, that there was no room for more people. In response, the Parsi priest took a spoonful of sugar and stirred it into the milk. He didn't make the milk overflow. He made it sweeter. He promised the king that his people would be like that sugar. They would blend into the land. They would honor its laws. And they would enrich its life without ever causing it to spill over. For 1,000 years, they have kept that promise. To be a Zoroastrian in the modern world is to be a quiet, steady force for the good. Whether in Mumbai, London, or New York, the modern follower of Zarathustra carries a portable hearth within their heart. They don't seek to convert others, for they believe that the light of the wise Lord is present in every soul that chooses the truth. Regardless of the name they call God, they live by the simple, powerful mantra we have heard throughout our journey. Humata, Huth. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds. Imagine walking into a modern Zoroastrian home during the Navjato, the initiation ceremony for a child. The room is filled with the warmth of family and the soft murmur of ancient Avestan prayers. The child is given 2 sacred items that they will wear for the rest of their lives, symbols of their commitment to the cosmic struggle. First is the Sudra, a simple white shirt made of fine muslin. It has a tiny pocket at the front, right over the heart. This is the pocket of good deeds. It is a reminder that every day we are meant to fill that pocket with our actions, making our contribution to the healing of the world. Then comes the Kusti, a sacred cord woven from 72 threads of fine white lamb's wool, representing the 72 chapters of the yasna. The child learns to tie and untie this cord several times a day, accompanied by prayers that remind them to keep the darkness at bay. As you lie there, imagine the rhythmic motion of tying that cord. It is a physical meditation. It is a way of girding the soul for the work of the day. Each time the Kusti is tied, the believer is making a choice. They are saying, I am a soldier of the light. I am an ally of Aja. In the modern world, where we often feel like tiny, insignificant cogs in a giant machine, this ancient ritual offers a profound sense of agency. It says that your thoughts matter, your words matter, your deeds are the very fabric of the future. You are not a victim of fate. You are an architect of the Frosh Karetha making, wonderful of the world. This sense of responsibility extends beyond human interactions and into the very earth beneath our feet. Zarathustra was perhaps the world's first environmentalist. Long before we had words like ecology or sustainability, the Zoroastrians understood that the elements fire, water, earth, and air were sacred trusts. They are the creations of the wise Lord, and to pollute them is to serve the spirit of the lie. In a modern Zoroastrian community, you will see this respect in the way they live. They were among the first to build hospitals and schools, to create public works that benefited everyone, regardless of faith. They see charity not just as a nice thing to do, but as a religious duty. To help a fellow human being is to strengthen the realm of Ahura Mazda. To plant a tree, to clean a river, to care for a stray animal, these are all acts of worship. Imagine the peace of a religion that doesn't demand you spend your life in a temple, but rather demands that you spend your life being a useful, honest, and productive member of the world. It is a faith of the workshop and the garden. It is a faith of the honest merchant and the compassionate doctor. It is a faith that celebrates life, rejecting the idea of extreme fasting or self-inflicted pain. The wise Lord wants you to be strong, to be happy, and to be capable of doing good work. Joy is seen as a weapon against the darkness. When you are happy, when you create beauty, when you celebrate the harvest or the spring, you are pushing back the shadow of Angra Mainyu. But why does this matter to us tonight, as we drift towards sleep in the year 2026? It matters because the questions Zarathustra asked are the same questions we ask in the quiet hours of the night. How do we find meaning in a world that often feels chaotic? How do we stay true to ourselves when the lie seems to be everywhere? The answer lies in that ancient Persian fire. We have seen how it has been kept burning, sometimes in secret, for thousands of years. In the city of Yazd in Iran, there is a fire known as the Atash Baramda fire of victory. It is said that this flame has been kept alive without ever being extinguished for over 1500 years. Imagine the generations of priests who have tended that flame. They have lived through wars, through the rise and fall of dynasties, through famine and through prosperity. Every single day, through the long nights and the blazing middays, someone was there to feed the fire. Someone was there to ensure the light didn't fail. That flame is a symbol of human persistence. It is a symbol of our refusal to let the darkness win. When you feel overwhelmed by the world, remember that flame. Remember that you, too, carry a spark of that eternal light. Your conscience is your internal fire. It doesn't need to be a roaring blaze that the whole world sees. It only needs to be a steady, quiet glow that guides your own steps. Zoroastrianism matters today because it reminds us that morality is a choice, and that choice is the most powerful thing we possess. We are not defined by our circumstances. We are defined by how we respond to them as the night deepens. I want you to imagine the world as the Zoroastrians see Itaz, a place poised on the edge of a great restoration. Every time you choose the good mind, you are helping to tip the balance. You are a part of a global, multi-millennial project to heal the universe. There is a profound comfort in that. You are not alone. You are part of a lineage of light seekers that stretches back to the very dawn of human history. Feel the tension leave your body as you embrace the sense of purpose. You don't have to save the whole world tonight. You only have to be at peace with your own heart. You have navigated the house of song and the house of lies in your thoughts today, and now it is time to rest. The wise Lord is not a judge who waits for you to fail. He is a friend and a partner who walks beside you. The ancient Persians used to say that at the end of time, the sun would never set again, and the darkness would be completely reconciled. As you drift off, let that be your final imager world of infinite, gentle light, where every broken thing is made whole, and every lie is replaced by a truth. The fire in the temple is settled now. The priest has offered the final prayers of the day. The stars over the desert are bright and watchful. The long journey from the caves of Zarathustra to your own bedside is complete. You have heard the echoes of the Magi, the wisdom of the kings, and the resilience of a people who refuse to let their light go out. The air is cool. The silence is heavy and sweet. You are safe. You are part of the order of the universe, the Asha that keeps the stars in their places and the heart in its rhythm. The struggle of the day is over, and the victory of the light is assured. Even in the stillness of the night, let the warmth of the eternal flame fill your dreams. Imagine the sweet scent of the spring wind from the Chinvet Bridge, the one that tells you that you are coming home. You have filled your pocket with good deeds, and now it is time for the soul to rest in the house of song. The story is told. The fire remains. The dawn will come, and you will be ready to meet it with a good mind and a courageous heart. Sleep now. The light is with you.